Doesn't not even like. Of course you're wrong, but like not even. Let's look at this and evaluate if it's right or wrong. No. No. Why are you questioning this? What? That. This is just how it is. Like Claudia Doran was just in here. She's brought on new ideas about gravity and broke that down. It was extremely meta. Like everything she's looking at, and to her, I'm gonna way oversimplify this, but like the variable that she's discovering with like the effect on gravity on the universe, she's like, oh my God, it's been there the whole time. It's right there. Like we can see it. But the response to her bringing up this theory over the years is like, you're fucking nuts. We know what gravity is. Don't question it. And to me, I'm like, but that's anti-science. And it also, by the way, you know, you're saying it with science and cults. It's a concept of like science and religion, because cult is religion in a lot of ways. You are religiously a zealot to this idea, so much to the sense, to the extent that you will practice the craziest tricks of cognitive dissonance, as you're pointing out, to stick to this, no matter how that is shaped up and how ridiculous it might be. And when you look throughout history at like what those terms are actually supposed to be, science and religion, they're both trying to accomplish the same thing. Science is trying to explain the scientific reasoning behind why it's all here and what the meaning of everything is. And religion is trying to explain the spiritual meaning behind why we're all here and what it is. So it's a different means trying to get to the same ends. And yet as humans, we've created this trick on ourselves. It's really tragic in my book throughout a lot of history. And I'm sure you've looked at this. I think you even teach a class on science and religion, but it's like we've created this trick in our minds where science and religion are opposed to each other rather than working together. And that's very fascinating to me.
Yeah, throughout the history of science, it's quite the opposite, because most of these scientists obviously are religious, especially in the scientific revolution. They're mostly Christian. There is, you know, a lot of Islamic science that's going on before the 1200s especially. But in the scientific revolution, it's in these European countries, and all these scientists are religious. And there's a famous quote by Galileo. There's people who said it before him, but he's famous. It's attributed to him mostly, where he says something like, the Bible teaches you how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. You know?
Wow.
But there's this concept that many of these scientists have, that's the idea that God has written two books. They believe that God has written two books, the book of Scripture and the book of nature, and they both should be read. So, you know, if you want to understand the book of Scripture, someone like Kepler, it's kind of a little condescending. He thinks that, well, God only grants the eyesight to be able to see the book of nature to a certain select few, like him, of course, you know, the mathematicians who are able to understand the inner perfections of the geometry that God used to create the world. And then we have the book of Scripture for the normal people who aren't able to understand that. But you know, the concept is that God has written two books, the book of Scripture, the book of nature, or the Word and the world. And these two books cannot contradict one another, because they're by God, and God doesn't make errors. And so if you think there's an apparent discrepancy between them, there's something that doesn't seem commensurate, there's some error, there's some way that they don't line up, it must be that you've interpreted one of them wrong. So for many of these scientists, it's not that we can interpret the world wrong. I mean, the world is the way it is. It looks the way it is. We must be interpreting Scripture wrong. So this plays a big part with Galileo. Galileo gets in trouble with the Catholic Church, and the main reason he gets in trouble, it's not because he's saying that the earth moves. That's by proxy he gets in trouble because of that. What the church is really upset about is he's challenging their authority. By saying that the earth moved, he is interpreting Scripture. When the book of Joshua says that God commanded the sun to stand still, the church has interpreted that literally. Okay, the sun must be moving and it stood still. So the earth must be stationary, the sun must be moving and it stopped in the sky. But Galileo is saying, no, the earth is moving, the sun is stationary. Okay, but you just have to reinterpret the book of Joshua. But no, Galileo, you don't get to interpret. You know, the Council of Trent determined who is the official interpreters. It's the church and the church fathers. You're neither of those, Galileo. Who are you? So you're usurping the authority of the church by deigning to interpret a passage. So that's the real kind of beef that Galileo and the church have. Who are you to interpret Scripture? You're just a scientist.
You're just a scientist. You're just a guy looking at all of it and trying to find evidence. It's crazy to me.
That gets even deeper than that. With any of these topics, you can get really into the weeds, but the Galileo trial is an especially interesting one because Galileo was warned about this. He's warned, you need to not hold or defend these views. You know, you can't hold or defend the idea that the earth goes around the sun. Obviously, this contradicts Scripture. So the guy who tells him this, Galileo receives a verbal kind of order from this guy named Cardinal Bellarmine, who tells Galileo, you're not allowed to hold or defend these. In fact, he has a written letter Galileo gets from Bellarmine saying, don't hold or defend these views. And that's going to play a role in a second. Then the current pope dies, and after another pope or so, one of Galileo's friends becomes Pope, Maffeo Barberini, who he becomes Pope Urban VIII. And he kind of tells Galileo, if I had been Pope, we wouldn't have really come down maybe as hard on that stuff. So Galileo thinks this is great. Like, he's kind of giving me the green light. And
good.
He's my friend. Like, who's going to come after me? I've got the Pope on my side. So he decides, I'm going to write this big book, The Dialogue on the Two Chief World Systems. It's a dialogue between these characters, but they're talking about, the Ptolemaic system and the Copernican system and which one's better. And he has the smart guy, there's three characters in this book. The guy who's like Galileo's mouthpiece is called Segredo. It's called Salviati. And then there's kind of like the middleman named Segredo. And then the Ptolemaic guy who Galileo disagrees with, he's called Simplicio. So you can kind of see like Galileo's bias there. So
Sounds
Simplicio
like
gets
the three families.
yeah, Simplicio gets destroyed in this book. And Galileo publishes it, and it starts causing a big stir. The Pope actually, one of the things that Galileo does, he puts in the mouth of Simplicio one of Pope Urban VIII's arguments that he had made when he was Maffeo Barberini, before he became Pope. And so this kind of makes Barberini, the Pope, mad a little bit, and Galileo is going to get in trouble. But what happens is Galileo is called before the Inquisition in Rome. He goes there, and someone goes into the archives in the Vatican and they pull out this document that says, we told you you are not allowed to hold, teach, or defend this view, the Copernican, and you just published this book, and that's exactly what you seem to be doing. You seem to be teaching Copernicanism. That's what this book is about, isn't it? And Galileo pulls out his letter from Maffeo Barberini, or from Cardinal Bellarmine, and he says, you didn't tell me I couldn't hold, teach, or defend. You told me I couldn't hold or defend. You never said anything about teaching, so I'm just teaching it in this book. I'm not defending it. I'm not saying it's better than the other one. And so there's this kind of back and forth argument about who is right or not. Eventually, Galileo recants. He says, I was wrong. The Ptolemaic system is right. And, he is sentenced to house arrest basically for the rest of his life. But yeah, so by proxy, the disagreement with Galileo and the church is about whether the earth moves, but it's really about authority and who has the right to interpret.
Control, yeah. It's always about control and power. That's the cynical way to look at how our world runs and the truth we've been told. And it can get dangerous because then you question everything when you start to see what human beings do when they get their hands on a place of, being higher than other people. And that's not really fair because there's plenty of things that get found. And it's like, yeah, that is what it is. But then there's other stuff like, maybe some of the MK Ultra things that aren't exactly what they are. But by the way, I'm seeing on the back here, some of the people you had vouch for your last book. This is insane, man. You got H.W. Brands.
Yeah,
who's
he's
like
at UT. He's
a dream guest. Tell him we'd love to get him here.
Okay,
he's
yeah,
one of the greatest historians to
he
ever
does podcasts
live.
occasionally. I see him on YouTube. People upload lectures
incredible.
of his and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you read some of his stuff?
Yes. His one book on the Revolutionary War, Our First Civil War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, and he's another one, like his bibliography is insane. It's just like the guy.
Yeah, I don't know. He pumps out a book a year, which I don't know how that's possible.
But it's like every different era. You know what I mean? And it's like it's dense too. Like when you read these books, they're really dense. He doesn't like I had Martin Duggart in here recently, who's amazing. He writes his as like a thriller, right? He tells a story. That's like his skill. H.W. Brands paints a beautiful picture, and it's entertaining to read, but it's not written like a thriller. It's written with really, examining historical fact and everything. So you're going to get the full picture, whatever that is. Yeah. But he's done so many, and the research is nuts. So,
I took a writing course with him when I was in grad school. He offered a course on writing. That was a really good course. I felt like I learned a lot.
That's the GOAT.
And at the beginning of each course, there weren't that many students in there because it's a grad course. There might have been 6 or 7 of us. So at the beginning, one person would read like a section of what they were writing, and then we'd talk about it and kind of critique it for a while. And then we talk about the reading for that week, whatever. But one week instead of the students reading their own work, he decided, okay, I'm going to read for y'all this time, and we can critique my own stuff. So he read, I think it was the preface or something to the book that he was working on. It was the one about Abraham Lincoln and John Brown, the Zealot versus the Emancipator. He read out loud to us the preface of that, and the way he spoke, I thought, oh my gosh, like this is in a different level than what we've been hearing. Yeah. His narration is really good too, and that is part of what makes him such a good speaker. He's very dynamic, and he knows so much about the topic that he's talking about that he can he can always, find a way to meander his way to the point. And at first you might think, oh, well, he's going into this kind of backstory. You were asked this simple question, but then he brings it around. I remember
The weave.
the weave. That is the weave, of course. I remember he was giving a talk at Book People, this bookstore in Austin. It was on one of his books. It was on a history of the West, I think it was. And so I went to it.
I think I read that one, actually.
Yeah, Dreams of El Dorado is what that book was called, I think.
I'm pretty sure I read that.
But someone asked him about the Transcontinental Railroad, I think it was, and then he went back to like he went back like 100 years before, and then he starts meandering his way. And by the time he got to it, I kind of forgot that he had asked about the Transcontinental Railroad, and then he said, "And that's why Bubba," he connected. And oh my gosh, just the weave in action. Yeah, so that way, he's really good at that.
Yeah, that's amazing. You took a course with that guy. That's cool. You're gonna tell your grandkids about that.
Yeah, it was good. He's good. Especially a good speaker.
Yes.
Everyone's paying it. I don't think he wants his students to take notes in class. I've been in there before where he says, "Don't take notes. I want you to listen to this." And so he talks and facilitates the discussion. But it was good.
Yeah, because I've looked at that in the past. He goes to a lot of events. He's done some podcasts like on Zoom and stuff. He hasn't really done any major podcasts though, like in person. I'm like, that's. I mean, now we actually got to get on this with you right after because now people are going to hear this. They're all going to try to get him in right away. But I would love to get that guy in if you know him like that. He's awesome. But also, I mean, you got Tim Weiner who wrote Legacy of Ashes, which is one of the all-time books on CIA.
Yeah, he's got a new book coming out on the CIA in the 20th century. So it's like a sequel to Legacy of Ashes.
There we
I
go.
think it comes out like next month or something.
Very cool. All right, I'm gonna have to check that out. But dude, this has been awesome. I got to read this book. We've all been saying this behind the scenes. We got to read this. This is out. This will be out now once we put this podcast out, but everyone can check it out. Link in the description, Project Mind Control. We'll also have a link to your first book, The Dirty Tricks Department, which you talked about today. But there's a lot there also with like science and religion and your studying of that history. That's very fascinating to me. We could do a whole podcast on that.
I know. Yeah, I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for giving me the time.
Thank you so much for coming up, man. Sorry you had to fly into Newark.
It actually worked out.
Joe put up a story this week where he's like the one air traffic controller left at Newark, and it's like it's that scene from Breaking Bad where the air traffic control guy like has all the planes crash because he's like losing his mind. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Let's get it fucking figured out in Newark. But John, thank you so much, and congrats on the new book.
Thank you.
All right, everyone else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.